Bill Bryson, in his book, The Body, he points out that the human brain shrinks by 20% by the time you're 80 years of age. 20% smaller, wow. Just the size of the brain itself. So I basically think people who are 80 and above really should not be running the world or running the country.
79-year-old Mitt Romney discussing a kind of understandable age cap for our leaders, a criticism that would apply to the current President Trump, the last one Biden, who insisted on, of course, governing into those years, and some other politicians in Washington. And tonight we have another example in the news of why this health situation is part of how we are governed and a big problem for the country. Mitch McConnell was, of course, until recently, the #1 Republican in the Senate, and he remains a powerful figure in the party. Mitch McConnell, though, is hospitalized, facing huge questions about his health that his office has not been very forthcoming about. I can tell you this is a story that's been brewing over time, because in the first days of anyone's hospitalization, even in public life where there can be questions of governance about your health, most people give you a few days. But this was over 3 weeks ago when medics rushed to his house. There was what was described as an unconscious individual, and since then he's been hospitalized. Now, the governor of Kentucky, who is a Democrat, has asked for more information now that the weeks have gone on. Republican senators and a former aide have detailed that they spoke to McConnell, which seems to be a kind of effort to show that he's at least able to talk to people by phone. But the larger question is whether you are the actual president and you have a VP ready to take your place, or you're a senator and there's a much more involved process if you are effectively incapacitated. Are we as a country going to deal with what has become a recurring issue in both parties without term limits, where people clearly can't be trusted to decide for themselves whether they should just continue on the job until they die, something we've also seen, by the way, on the Supreme Court. The issue has been dominating Washington lately.
Do you know that he's alive?
I don't. Just the things that I've heard and seen from some friends is that he's obviously not doing well, but don't know if he's alive or has passed away.
How twisted is it that for almost a month, no one in Washington has had any idea what happened to Mitch McConnell?
A dear friend of mine worked for him for a long time. We hope that he's in good health and recovering. But listen, he has a taxpayer-funded role. His salary is paid for by all of us. I think that there's an obligation to give us more transparency.
There is an obligation. So often in politics, we talk about the people in these jobs, and there's intrigue around that. But this isn't really only about Mitch McConnell. The whole point of public office is he's got a job to do on behalf of his constituents. And there may be a kind of a cynicism here that people have now become accustomed, especially under Donald Trump, to people who are in office and don't even pretend, as we discussed tonight, about every other person that they're supposed to be governing. The AP reports that under state law, McConnell, who's not seeking re-election, is involved in a situation where if his seat did become vacant by August 3rd, there'd actually be a special election to pick a replacement. At the very minimum, we need to know, of course, if the seat did become, in that parlance, vacant. The generational issue is huge. Democrats like Feinstein and Biden, Republicans like McConnell and Trump right now, insisting on governing well past the normal retirement age, and then doubling down sometimes by refusing to give basic information about their health and just sort of stonewalling and seeing what they can get away with. The New Yorker memorably cast this in that race. You'll notice McConnell's on there, as is Trump, Biden, and Pelosi, who didn't face health transparency questions but did govern into her 80s. Michelle and Mark are here. Michelle, your thoughts, and how big a deal is this when he's that powerful and weeks go by and we know virtually nothing?
Well, it's a really big deal, in part because there's different procedures if he really is incapacitated and they're just waiting to tell us so as to avoid a special election, then they are subverting the sort of, at least the intent of the law that Kentucky passed to govern precisely these kind of situations. But then, as you said, more broadly, I mean, this kind of problem of gerontocracy is one one of the few things I can think that it really is a both sides problem, right? That you really do have this crisis in both parties of a kind of increasingly aging and sclerotic leadership. I think the Democrats have taken steps to address it, in part because of the trauma of Joe Biden's aborted reelection campaign. We've seen a number of Democrats die in office and kind of make it easier for Republicans to pass legislation because seats that Democrats should be holding or votes that they should have are just not there. We just recently saw a Republican New Jersey congressman leave. I mean, I don't think this was a function of age, but leave for weeks, if not months, and his office kind of feeling no responsibility to tell people where he was. And so it's a multifaceted problem. I mean, it's part of it is about a total lack of accountability and sort of contempt for the public and a sense of entitlement, and also to just like a structural problem of how we're governed in this country.
Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Michelle. I mean, this is a very urgent issue. And I think, if you were to put, say, some kind of ballot measure out nationwide, calling for like a 72-year-old age limit on running for federal office somewhere, I'm guessing it would win overwhelmingly. I mean, I think a test case recently was Janet Mills, the governor of Maine, who's 77 years old, term limited out of the office of governor, said she's going to run for Senate, was handpicked pretty much by Chuck Schumer and the Democratic Senate committee in Washington, and she went nowhere. I mean, that sort of gave rise to the Graham-Plattner problem to some degree. But I do think that there is a bit of a pocket veto going on here. And yeah, I mean, McConnell is the latest in a very long string of pretty sad cases. I mean, it's a little bit less sad because McConnell, unlike, say, Donald Trump or Joe Biden, doesn't really have that much responsibility these days compared to what he would have a few years ago. He's no longer in leadership. He's not running for re-election. Tom Kaine is running for re-election, which is incredible. But I think this is obviously a issue that could get a lot of traction if someone were to propose a law around it.